Agentic RAG is one of the most talked about topics at the moment. And the key part is instead of being a one-way pipeline, Agentic RAG basically allows you to check whether at certain points in the control flow of a search pipeline, you actually want to go another route or you want to loop. So basically, after the retrieval, you could ask, am I actually answering the user question with my generation? And if not, you can run a new retrieval or you can run a retrieval on a different database you actually have. You can also use LLMs to basically decide, okay, what should I actually query? So do I have a question about sales data? Then I might even query a regular database and use SQL. Am I looking for more like textual information? Then I might go to the vector database. Is the query rather keyword based? Then I might opt for BM25. And agentic RAG, for me at least, means using LLMs in the control flow and at certain points for decision making, but not giving them free reins. And the key is knowing when to stop. This is what we are talking about today on How AI is Built as we continue our search series. And we are talking to Stephen Batifol from Silis. And Stephen and I discuss agentic RAG and the future of search, where the search system actually can decide what path it wants to take to find the right answers. And I would love to know what's your take on agentic RAG. Let me know in the comments and whether you are actually excited about, because I'm still a little bit torn. Otherwise, let's do it.
I think what's nice when you have agentic RAG is like the usual RAG one is it's a one step basically. So you do it, it runs once, then if you can find the data, then it's fine. And if it can't, then it'd be like, yeah, I can't find it. What's nice with agentic is have a loop. You can tell him or tell it, just be like, okay, try to find the data. If you don't have it, then go somewhere else. And then you don't have to run everything in sequence. That's usually my favorite part. Also, it can understand the query better. That's like a part that I like as well. Usually, you can if you have like multiple questions in your query, then usually you can also like either split it or then be like, okay, are you sure? Checking if the answer is correct, and then if it's not, you go back to the beginning, or then you check again for an answer. That's usually my favorite part.
Are you actually running like the traditional retrieval pipe in agentic RAG as well, so that you query preprocessing, retrieval, re-ranking, or
Yeah.
are you giving it complete flexibility?
No, it depends. Usually, it depends on what I want to do, but I like to have it like a bit more structured. So basically, I like when my agent is doing the part that I'm lazy to do or to define. It's really like the way I do it. It's usually I'm like, yeah, that part. If my agent could decide either to do a search on the web or vector search, then I would love that. So usually that's the part I do, but it's a bit more. I like it because agentic RAG is quite cool, but it's also quite expensive. So it's also like the part where I try to maybe sometimes reduce it. If I have to put the cost down a bit or something, then I would be like, okay, I'm going to actually do it myself.
Yeah. And
latency as well.
I talked to Doug Turnbull, and he is starting like a counter movement to RAG, which is SCAR. I'm not sure whether you've seen it.
Yes. I heard about it. I heard about is it like, it's not RAG, it's GAR.
Basically, generative augmented retrieval. I think it would suit very well into the agentic RAG as well, that you give like control to the LLM to adjust the query and do especially like the query pre-processing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I feel like fully right on that one. I think, yeah, like different parts, but yeah, I quite like the GAR. I don't like the name, but I like the generative part, yeah, of it. And I really like, as you said, the LLM understands the query and then decides to try to break it up, maybe, or try to find like better answers or try to actually, there's like hider as well, which also would like create some different queries if something is not clear, or would actually invent some queries, which is something that I find quite interesting and fascinating.
Yeah. What always pops into my mind is I have the different retrieval strategies, and for different queries, different retrieval strategies might be useful. Mm-hmm. Have you played around with routing two different retrievers as well, which implement different strategies?
What do you mean with that?
So basically, I could have one retrieval strategy which basically does a structured extraction as well. So if I have a query with like dates, for example, I'm extracting the dates and using that to filter it. But I could also run just a hide. So basically, I'm taking the query, generating a hypothetical document, how it could look like, and then just using that for it. So I think there are so many different options, and different queries likely demand different routes to go.
Yeah, I haven't tried this route usually. The thing, what I'm missing a bit on at the moment is, so I built a lot of agentic rags and like a lot of agents in general, but then I don't really have and take the time to then try all the different retrieval resources, I would say. So no, I haven't tried this one.
Yeah, because this is probably for me like the most interesting part, because it takes so much work to get a search engine to work, but then it's more fixed. Once you do like a new implementation or you do adjustments to like the way it's searched, then you can basically bring it in, but not really like dynamically based on query, which would be way more interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's one thing I'm excited about, like in the future, actually. Yesterday, someone asked me, what are you excited the most about 2025? And I was like, it's actually that, just agentic workflows where based on the query, really, it's, okay, I'm going here, which would be more interesting, I would say.
Yeah. Can you maybe walk us through like the typical workflow from start to end, basically from query to answer, how it would look like with Agentic RAG?
So what I have is really, so you have your query, then obviously, then you're going to process it with like different ways of creating chunks, or then you're going to create embeddings. The different ways of doing it. Recently, I think what's the name? Called Pally, which like can create embeddings, but it takes like images. Like I've seen a lot of success in that one, but just to answer the question, so then you have your embedding, and then you're going to process everything. You're going to store your embeddings directly in a vector database, and then you have your LLM that is then going to interact with it. And the good part about Agentic RAG is that instead of being like a one-way through, then it's going to be like, okay, you have your query, you have your embeddings, but then you have your user query, and then you're really going to check, okay, I'm here. I'm trying to answer the question of this user. And then usually my workflows will be like checking if the answer is correct. So if we're actually answering the question of the user, so then I have different workflows in my agentic RAG that is doing that. And then it's also checking like different sources if actually what I'm saying is correct. That obviously depends on the data I have. It's like sometimes it's private data that I can't check, but then if it's public data, then I will actually do a check. And then I usually also have a workflow that is, are you happy with the answer? So it's actually asking the LLM itself, hey, are you happy with the answer? And is it actually answering the question? And that's my typical workflow for Agentic RAG.
Yeah. And do you actually allow loops as well? Or is it basically just the workflow after workflow that's true? And there is a branching back to another position, which basically,
it's more like branches. Yeah, it's more, okay, I've decided this route. So it's for now, it's really like a lot of ifs. It's like a lot of ifs with like text, because I return some kind of text for my workflow and like part of my graph. So yeah, that's more like what I have at the moment.
Yeah.
I've tried to play, with React. I don't know if you played with it. And I don't know what's your success with it, but for me, when I did it, I was really impressed at what it could do and like all the, like how it can resonate. But then also a lot of times it would just not do it again. It's really not predictable. I had like 30% success rate on one task, for example, with React.
So React basically what it just means, it's like a flow you're going through all the time, like thought, action, observation. Exactly. And you basically try to improve the answers. I have like very limited success. Or rather, I got it to work once, but I didn't get it to work the second time.
Yeah, for me, it was really like, and I remember I had a demo actually where I was like, okay, I'm going to showcase React because it's really cool. And what I like is that it's rewriting the query as well of the user sometimes as well. I'll be like, okay, this was not clear. I'm going to try to redo it. And yeah, when I was preparing for the demo, I was like, man, it works like 1 time out of 5. And I was like, yeah, I can't have that for my demo. It's too stressful. And then when I talked to other people, they were like, similar thing with React from them. It seems like it's a cool one, but not there yet.
I've always ended up, I tried it, and I've always ended up writing some kind of workflow with a loop, with branching, but I haven't found a good library for that as of yet.
Yeah. No, yeah. It's React is, yeah. Let's see. Let's see if we have an improvement on it. I think it could be really good. It could be very versatile, I would say.
Yeah. What do you actually, the different types of context management I find of very interesting, because you quickly, once you do like the cost optimization, degrade into adding a cache, adding a semantic cache or whatever, but also trying to compress what you're feeding into the model, the context. Then you also have a message store of the past interactions, and this you have to manage. What are the different components you bring into the agentic RAG, and how do you manage those?
Yeah, this one is a big one usually. I feel like first it also gonna depends on the LLM you're gonna use. They have like different context windows, so that's like the big one. But then usually how I do it is that the usual, the first classic, I'm just gonna store previous interaction with the agent, all the discussions of the user, and then gonna put that back into the context. Which is nice at first. At first you're happy, at first everything works. But then at one point it becomes too big. Or then the LLM is confused because there are like so many, there can be like so many different topics as well in the discussion. So I usually also try to identify like some keywords and topics, and then maybe like sometime I haven't tried yet, but I've read about it. Is like maintaining a sliding window for the different interactions you had. So that's maybe like you have a bigger context than a smaller one. And then for long-term storage in the context, usually it's more, okay, I don't keep that in memory. I'm going to store that somewhere in a vector database. And then later on, the agent will read it again. That's usually what I felt doing, and also what I read, mostly of what other people are doing. And then for bigger, like once the context window gets really big, also sometimes I've seen people use like embeddings actually. They create like embeddings and then they store them, and then you have like embeddings of the previous context. It's usually, ways I've seen.
I think the agentic movement, it's so interesting because you always, if you take it into production, you end up using every part of NLP. You have factuality checks, you have some classification, you have different compression, different ways of compression, all kinds of search.
Yes. Yeah, it's really for me. So back a long time ago, I was working on an NLP a long time ago. And then I went to like software engineering, machine learning engineering, and now come back to it. And it's very funny to see exactly as you said, like you see all the different components. Then you see the scores that I used to work with, like the Blue score, for example, which for translation and stuff. And you see those. And I find that to be, very interesting. But yeah, as you said, you're going to use everything like keyword extraction, topic detection, and it's like the drift as well, context drift, topic drift. Like you're going to have all of those, at least at one point, which is like very interesting.
The models, like for example, the Jamba models, which combine a transformer and a state space models, could an interesting way can actually have the long context transformer for all history, but more of the transaction to run through like the Mamba models, which have the state compression.
See, I don't have an opinion on this one because I just saw it quickly, so I won't like try to say something and be like, I have an opinion on this one. But in theory, from what I read quickly, it could be, but really I haven't played with it. So
the only thinking for me is I haven't tried it out myself, so I've used it, but only the state space model. And I think that's in the end what we're doing with context compression. But in context compression, we're just throwing in the transformer model.
Yeah, it's always going back to the transformer. It's at least mostly for now.
Yeah. Have you any like more large scale project where you really have like big vector database or a big document store which the agent has to use or has access to?
Yeah, I've done it. Actually, it's usually part of some of my demos as well. So when I give a talk and when I talk about something, I would like to have a live demo. So I'm building a demo now it's not that big. It's 35 million vectors. So it's not gigantic, but then my agent is actually checking that one out. So it's really, I have different ways. So It's like first my agent will try to filter itself on itself. If I have a query and then I'm asking this about, I don't know, Uber data in 2021. So then I have a couple of few shots tuning where then I've shown the agent how to do filtering based on some queries. So then it's going to create a query itself to filter, and then it's going to run the vector search directly. So that's it's like whatever tool I'm using. But that's what I've been trying to do. And it's another one that I want to do is that I want my agent to then also be able to exploit partitioning after, if possible, depending on, you can put, like in a vector database, you can partition your data depending on some different fields. So if I have like data that is like Wikipedia, for example, it's you have it per language. So you can partition it per language. So then you could, if you want, you could have your agent going through the database, but only for a specific language. If I'm asking you, I don't know, what's the capital of Paris? And I'm asking you in English, you probably want to have the answer in English. So then you can only filter through English in the first place. So those are like the strategies that I've done basically for like large scale retrieval.
Yep. Do you play around with any chunking the data strategy, which actually made it easier for the agent to retrieve the relevant documents?
Yeah, so at the beginning I was doing like smaller chunks, I would say, also because the LLMs were not as capable as now. Now I just throw the whole page usually. I'm like, my page is one chunk, and I found it to be way better if I'm talking about PDFs, for example. Sorry. And I found it to be better. I'm integrating some metadata chunks as well, which are usually very useful. Or then if my document is a web page, then I'm going to more split it into like paragraphs. And then I have a chunk of the paragraph, but then a summary chunk of the page or a summary chunk of another section. Usually the way I do it is have the chunk itself and then have a summary somewhere of another one as well, so then you can like filter through the first one and then go through the second one if needed.
Yeah. Are you running like multiple retrieval and then you're fusing those because you have different representations? So you can run retrieval on the summary on the source document, but also on the metadata.
Yeah. So like sales plug here, VLLMs, we support like multiple vector search at the same time. So it's up to 10. So that's basically what I'm doing. And then I'm using a ranker after. So it's usually how I do it is, going to do vector search up to 10, as I said. And then I'm using my good old re-ranker.
Even like more difficult question, moving more into the SQL generation.
Yeah.
How do you think will structured information stored on like regular databases and DB come into play for agents? If you've played around with that, what do you think is like the best representation to give structured information to an agent?
Good question. When I play around it, usually it's a lot of prompt engineering, I feel like. So it's a lot of, being able for the agent to understand which one it should pick and when. But so far it's really, you have a query, and I'm just talking about what I tried, but you have a query and then you generate a SQL query for the data and the result. And then if you have another query that is a bit more natural language, I would say, then you go into unstructured. And then what I've played with is really, then you have two results and then you ask the LLM to compare them basically. And then you're like, which one do you think is better? And then if you think this one is better, then you can just return this one. That's the way I've done it so far. But I haven't found I don't know if you have an opinion on this one, but I haven't found a way of this exactly structured data. Like I have a result. This is the correct answer you should give. Usually I'm just asking the LLM.
So what I have had great success with is, especially when the data is a bit more complex and the data schema is very normalized, and the LLM really struggles with the SQL generation because it has to do too many joins. I had success with just basically trying to figure out like what could be valuable and creating materialized views for the different representations. And those I keep pretty large to include as much of the source data as possible, but then it basically can just take one table and basically filter it down to what it needs. And through that, you have to do a little bit more work yourself, but you make it easy for the LLM to basically retrieve the different. And also the amount of query types you usually hit for the like taking data out, it's limited.
Yeah.
Because like often you have something like growth rate, you have absolute numbers, you have relative numbers, there's broad strokes, and you have it like from 4 different organizations or 4 different products and stuff. But there aren't like so many different scenarios you would actually expose. So it's, if you can't get 5 or 6 materials to use, and you're finished.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to have a look at those a bit more. Like what I want to work on a bit more is actually like the real production workload. So it's actually having structured data and unstructured data at the same time. Because I feel like that's what most companies have actually.
Yeah. And it's like the unstructured data at the moment is coming into the limelight. It's really hard because you suddenly can't use it. So we start to ignore the structured data, which should be easier to get.
Yeah, we're like, man, everything is structured. Let's go.
And I want to know the retrieval, especially for using the metadata. What are you using for that? Are you using something like unstructured to extract the basically fields of the user query, or what are you?
Yeah, it's basically that's what I'm using at the moment. It's really like I gave my LLM some examples of queries, and then I'm like, okay, based on those I don't remember my prompt, but it's really think of like things that are very important. So like things of entities or different things or years or blah, 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 that could be used as metadata. And then it's a lot of playing around as well to actually create a filter that works. Because like for metadata, it's going to depend on so many things, so many variables. So I basically limit my metadata filtering to a couple of fields, because then I'm like, otherwise it just becomes too complex to actually generate it. So then I have a metadata, in my collection. And then it's really going to be like, okay, I have everything like creation time, last access, the source and everything. And then I'm going to be like, okay, if I'm asking you, I don't know, what is that in the Guardians, then the source is likely Guardian. So then we have filtering as well with Prefix, Midfix and Suffix. So then I can just play around with those as well. That could be like source contains Guardian, you know.
Can you maybe give a few examples on like different things you can filter with Prefix, Suffix and Midfix?
Yeah. I mean, with Prefix, it's going to be like, okay, like you want something to start with. Wait, sorry, I confused always the one. But if you have the percentage before, I never remember which one it was, but yeah, the percentage before the word prefix should be. Then it's okay, you want something to like finish with that kind of. So like everything before, you don't really care. And then midfix is like going to be in between. So you have to, if you have to have the house in the middle, which doesn't really work, but you want to like midfix on O and U, then you could find somehow the house in the middle. I'm terrible for finding examples live, but and then suffix would be like, I don't know, for me, or like all the suffix were like company name, because my documents were like created in that way. So it was always like year underscore company name underscore no, then that's it. And so then I would be like, okay, if you find some kind of company, then you put it at the end and then you just check before. So that's like the way I would do it.
A good example, I think, for suffix are either like file extensions, where they get it from, or also like legal forms of companies, which is something I have at the moment. Like in Germany, you have like
GmbH and
and stuff like that, which is a good example of suffix as well.
Yeah, I feel like, for those, but so that's the way I do it. I found it so interesting, so useful, and also like having the not in filter as well, being like, okay, like I want data that is actually not in those metadata filters.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the breaking mechanisms. Do you have stuff
the what, sorry?
Into the breaking mechanism, I call it. Do you have stuff into the workflow? We actually just break the entire workflow, the generation, and say, hey, we can't return the results. For example, like the query is really ambiguous. I can't answer that. Return it to the user. The retrieval results are really bad. Like we can't do anything. Like maybe retrieve or just break off the entire flow.
Yeah. So with React, for example, when I was trying, there was like some kind of way where you can ask for stop to, you don't know what's happening. You're like, hey, let's take a break. we're going to stop here. Sometimes what I like is you have some question disambiguation. So really being like, either try to infer what's happening with the context you have around you, because sometimes it can help. Like you be a user and you're like, I want information about it or about that. And then you can be like, what is that? So then it's trying to infer what's happening around. If the query is ambiguous or doesn't make any sense, what I found success with usually is like to really divide the query. So that's the first place if we have multiple questions. And then it's also actually sometimes asking the LLM to ask the user, are you happy with the answer or something? And then based on that, then you can you go on a different route. That's also like a way I've done in the past is really, okay, sometimes check if there's periodically, if the user is happy or whatever. And then if yes, then we can continue. And if no, then you have to ask again and then correct everything. But I feel like I like the idea of asking the user, but it's also like a lot of work for the user. The user doesn't really want that very often. So that's usually a way. And then, yeah, I think those are like the ways. And then the last thing I can think of is like multi-stage retrieval. So instead of going all in, we do it in multiple stages.
Yeah. I think this is one of the most important things actually to figure out. Like for one, LLMs saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
When they don't have any information on that. And the second thing is like when you actually ask for more information or interact with a user, and when to actually also break off that flow. Like when does it have enough? And this is so hard in text because it's like really hard to define what is enough.
Yeah, it is. And for me, something I'm quite happy about is that I built something and I'm like, so it's just like a simple demo. It's like the financial of Uber and Lyft, the usual. But then I built like a whole thing around. And then I asked my LLM, okay, what is the financial data of Uber in 2023? And I only have data of 2021 and 2022. And then it was like, oh, actually, I don't have this data at all, so I can't say. And I was like, yes, it didn't try to do something else. Or be like, that's a part. But yeah, otherwise I feel like it's still a hard one.
So it's like free business idea for the people out there. I think information intake, customers, patients, or whatever, if you can figure that out, because so much is dependent on what have you already heard or reacting based on the information which the user has already given you to ask follow-up questions. And when you actually don't want to go deeper because you don't really get any more good information. If you can figure it out, it has so many information.
Yeah.
The interesting part with agents, how do you evaluate the success and also how do you evaluate the retrieval in the agentic graph?
Mm-hmm. I think I have two kind of ways usually. So the first one is some kind of task completion rate. So it's like, actually, have you actually finished the task? You think you finished it at least. Maybe it's not successful, but at least you finished it. Because there's also a way of sometimes agents will just go on and then they just never finish. So that's one part. Then also obviously asking for evaluation for the person using it. So, all those like some thumbs up and down. Obviously not everyone will do a thumbs up and down, but that can help. And then also like check yourself or check with another LLM as like the data that the answer of. You have some kind of older data set, and then you're going to check every time you change your agent or something. Is it still answering my questions correctly? Yes or no? I feel like that can be a good one. And then I think there's also, I played around very quickly with it with RAGAS, but I don't know if it's really fantastic for agents. But I know for RAG was really good. So yeah, you can monitor different things, faithfulness or bad retrieval or bad response. Those were quite useful, I feel like.
I think RAGAS should be really suitable for agents if you have a retrieval component as well, especially because they have basically metrics for all the retrieval stuff, but also for the answer, which is
exactly. It's not only the usual metrics. So yeah, I feel like it's quite a nice project as well. Let's see.
It's as soon as you move into workflows, I think, especially with agents and LLMs, the evaluation part becomes a massive pain because you have so many different steps and you have to evaluate each of those. And then the total system.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your opinion here when like the whole like ChatGPT arrived and then everyone moved into AI? Everyone was building, everyone is still building. No one was really checking for like evaluation. It's good that we're actually coming back a bit to that. Before, in the ML world, as we call it, the old one, would always evaluate something before you put it to the production. At least I hope so. So yeah, now it's good to have some kind of evaluation as well there.
How do you think the multimodal stuff? I talked to Jo Bergom yesterday on Call-Poly especially. How do you think this will impact like your agentic workflows?
I think this one in particular, I'm really looking forward to work with it more. I feel like it's very promising. Also using VLLMs in general can be like, it seems to be very promising for documents that are a bit more complex. When you have some tables or you want to learn the schema of the document and everything, you don't want to lose everything. I feel like those, in my opinion, then I know some people in my company have very different opinions, but mine is that it's really going to be like game changer, especially for agents, especially for RAG over complex documents. And yeah, I think we're going to continue with the normal one for, if you have like, like an HTML with no images and stuff. Very simple. But for the rest, it's nice to be able to keep the structure. Also because parsers are very bad at that. It's very hard, so don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming them. But like parsing PDF and stuff like correctly can be very hard. So yeah, like really hyped about multimodal in the future in Call-Poly as well. Like it has a lot of potentials.
Yeah. It's like a bet. Who is smarter? You in building parsing pipeline or the LLM actually interpreting the unparsed information?
Exactly. I feel like, I think the LLM will win.
All the time for sure. It's perfect. What do you think is like missing in the space? What would you love to see built? Or what have you experienced actually missing in your stack when you're building flows?
I think at the moment it's, I don't know, I was talking to someone yesterday that works at Intel. They're talking about standards. It's something a bit stupid, but at the moment. So I come from like the MLOps world where I arrived, there was no standard. So I left. It was clear what you were doing. I feel sometimes in my workflow, that's what I miss. I know it's not a very sexy one, but it can be a very interesting one. I was like, okay, instead of, I know it's very hard, instead of playing around with, okay, I need an embedding model, I need that. A lot of people don't know what they need to do. Have some kind of like standards could be nice, I think. Okay, you have complex PDFs, then maybe your best bet is to go like multimodals. I think that's a thing I'm like looking forward to a bit. I love learning new things all the time. Sometimes be like, okay, this one I know exactly how to do it. I don't need to learn yet another thing because something popped off yesterday. I think that's one thing I'm looking forward a bit.
You will. I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it's more like, I think it's, okay, maybe like I should rephrase, but it's like not exactly like you for the one path because everyone is different. It's more like having a rough idea of, okay, this is what should happen basically.
I think established best practices, not for what to use, but how to approach a problem. And I think that is what is established in MLOps already, but what's missing.
Exactly. That's better words. That's basically what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And more on the technical side, like what is a solution that if it would be built, you would adopt in a heartbeat?
I feel like lots. So parsing is one where sometimes, honestly, parsing all those different documents can be a pain. Where I know there are parsing solutions, but I still feel like they're struggling for like different things because everyone is like still learning about that. So there's so many new research. But one where I'm like, man, this parsing, I'm sure it didn't miss anything. Then I'd be like, I think that's one part where I'd be really willing to pay for it for like different use cases. Your data will be there. It won't be missed. But then it's more like, how do you retrieve it and how do you search it? But that's like a different part. Like the parsing problem is we always said like garbage in, garbage out. It's the same. And it's the part that I used to not like when I was a data scientist, cleaning the data, making sure everything is cool. I still don't like to do it.
And that's a hard question because it's overrated, underrated. What do you think in the LLM space or agent space is overrated? What is underrated?
I think underrated is embeddings model. They're like make or break, I think. It's like, I have an example where back then, so I was demoing something like chatting with a Berlin parliament. So data is in German and it's very formal German. And I have a demo which was using the embeddings of OpenAI. Couldn't answer my questions at all. He would miss my questions. He would be like, no, this is not in the document, so I can't answer. And then I used the embeddings of GenAI, which are trained on English and German, or at least the one that I used. And then it actually found my answer, because my answer was written clearly in German, but then OpenAI had like completely missed it. So I think that's the part that is, people are slowly going back to it, but like actually embedding models are quite important. So you can't just pick like any random one. Overrated. For now, my opinion is long context windows. I would say is overrated. Like the 2 millions apparently of Google, that when Google showed it in their blog post, it looked fantastic. But then when like other people did some tests, it was still like, but it's still not there. They miss some things that is in there. I think it's amazing when you do something one shot. You have, I don't know, a 300 pages PDF that you have a question. Quickly, you just want to go through it. That's cool. But if you, I think in my opinion, for like big company, I think you might be missing something. And I don't know if you've seen, but NVIDIA released a paper yesterday or 2 days ago, which is called OP-RAG, which is, I forgot what the OP is.
How do you spell?
It's OP and RAG. But it was like, you basically keep the order of your chunks and everything. And then they were showing that with that, it was like better. It was better than the classic RAG, but then it was also better than long context windows.
Can't find them, only hitting Oprah.
Yeah, no. I have to find it. Yeah, everyone is always trying new things, and I'm always like, but yeah, I found it this one. So yeah, in my opinion, this one is a bit overrated.
Perfect. And if people want to start building the stuff we just talked about, would you point?
If they want to build it, you mean? I think first is really, okay, build something you're interested in. Like, I was interested in chatting with the Berlin Parliament, so then that's what I did. And then, I don't know if everyone would agree, but I would still think that using Llama Index or something could be useful if you want to start. First, because the documentation explains things quite clearly, I would say, like what you need to do. And then, yeah, then it's also, I don't know if you played with Claude recently, but also Claude can be like amazing at explaining things, like when you start. And I don't mean it in a way of, hey, write the entire code. It's more like if you ask, you'd be like, okay, can you explain me what it's doing here? And then like you still write the code if you want. My opinion is that if you want to learn, you still have to go through it. But yeah, I would say those can be very useful. Like asking LLMs, hey, I have that. And then it's going to tell you, okay, write this code, but then, hey, have it explain it, please.
And what's next? What's next for you? What's next for Silas? What's on the horizon? You can tease it.
I know we're going to have like full text search. So that's a cool part going back to this. No, I think for us, it's like, for me, it's going to work more actually with multimodal, I would say in general. Like what we talked about before, I feel like it's going to only get better and better. So that's something I want to work more with. And then also just in general, having agents that are like taking over things I don't like doing. So if I could have an agent that could call someone, I'd be the happiest man on earth. I hate calling. So I'm actually trying like now to build on the sides with some things where like you have real time voice and then like actually trying to answer some questions. So yeah, maybe at one point I can showcase it if it actually works. But yeah, otherwise multimodal.
And if people want to follow along with you or with Silas, where can they?
Yes, they can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. So it's Stefan Batifol on LinkedIn and Stefan Batifol on Twitter, or X, I should rather say. But a lot of things I do is published on LinkedIn. Also, I'm based in Berlin. If you want as well, I organize meetups. So I organize unstructured data meetups monthly, which is like everything about unstructured data.
So what can we take away when we're building search application? I think the first thing is don't fall into the hype cycle. I think like agents is at the moment like peak hype in a lot of the like LLM search area. And agents in a lot of ways has lost a little bit of its meaning because it's used so freely for different things, for workflows, for the multi-agents where the LLM actually plans itself, like the React-based agent, where you have multiple steps the agent has go through. He interacts with the environment, he observes the state, and then he makes a decision what to do next. And then basically steps over time. This like close to in the direction of reinforcement learning, or like how reinforcement learning defines an agent, but the learning component is a little bit missing. And optimizing basically a policy which optimizes an objective function, which isn't really there yet. And I think this is the main thing missing for me from Agentic RAG, from actually working. You don't really have a good way of optimizing agents because you don't have a clear way to do performance analysis or debugging. Because if the agent is planning freely and then there are like 4 different agents or sub agents which are doing different tasks and have different tools interacting with each other, like how do you know where it actually went wrong or where did it start to run wrong? Because there can be a massive path dependence. And that's why I actually don't like the free planning agents. And for me, Agentic RAG, where it's really interesting, is actually we interjected at some portions of the control flow. We decide based on, for example, the user query, which database are we querying and which type of search are we using, for example. And this allows you that you can, based on the context, based on user profiles, you can take different paths through your query system. And also what Stephen mentioned with actually based on the answer you in the end generated, or you could do the same based on the results you have that you feed like in the top 10 results, you can actually decide, okay, am I serving the information need from the user and try to give the LLM as much context about the user as possible. And if not, you can basically try a different query or rephrase the query, do query expansion, whatever. And this will add to the latency of the query. But if you're not time constrained, if you're, for example, not in an e-commerce application, but the quality of the results matters more, I think this is something that could be very interesting, especially if it's very critical or data or results that go into the direction of, hey, we are making decisions based on it, where you actually should spend the time, hey, what are actually the relevant results and what am I trying to answer here? And I think asking the LLMs, am I serving an information need, is probably pretty tricky because it can be argued in many different ways that a document might be relevant. I would probably turn it around and do like more of an error analysis. What's wrong with the different documents given the query, and use that as feedback to maybe improve the query, do expansions or take different query path or expand the query in certain ways or restrict it. And through that, you probably also get really valuable feedback data for your search system, which you can use to improve it over time. And yeah, I think for Agentic RAG, I've implemented it twice now, but you basically use it for certain points in decision making. Also, an interesting project on that is from Mixspread, their BMX project, where they use LLMs for query expansion, basically. So they generate alternative queries in the beginning, which for me is also like a form which would fall into this Agentic RAG definition. But the most used approach is more like the dynamic routing. Hey, where am I going? Which database system should I query? And how should I use it in the end? And yeah, that's basically it. I would love to get your opinions on Agentic RAG and whether you implemented something like that before and how successful you were. Did you actually see quantitative improvements in your search metrics, but also in the feedback you get from the users? And this I think is a little bit missing in the RAG space in general. Like it's not as metric driven as traditional searches, and we are getting there, like especially with ragas, for example, we are getting more and more metric driven, but it's also a little bit trickier in my opinion, because we are not just delivering the results, we are delivering answers, so we have to evaluate multiple components at the same time. And yeah, let me know what you think. Also, if you like the episodes, leave a like. If you're in YouTube, leave a review on Spotify. It helps a lot. And otherwise, I will catch you next week. So talk to you soon.